Hi guys, Olive here. As promised, I am here today to tell you what is on my Nonfiction November 2018 TBR, as well as give you some recommendations for each of our 4 prompts. If you missed my announcement video that I posted last week, I will of course link that down in the description box below for you to go and watch if you choose to. If you're new to the event or you want some more info about it, I think it'll be a really good resource for you. But I will give you the Reader's Digest version here. Nonfiction November is a month-long reading initiative which encourages BookTube to pick up more nonfiction. To be a participant, all you need to do is read at least one nonfiction book during the month of November. Easy enough, right? But to make things a little bit more interesting, we do give you 4 different challenges every single year that you can choose to take on, you can choose to combine, interpret them however you want, or ignore them completely, whatever works for you. As I said in the Nonfiction November announcement video, our 4 challenges are as follows. Number 1, Pastime or Pastime. Number 2, Self or Shelf. Number 3, Wander or Wonder. And number 4 is Macro or Micro. These challenges were designed to encompass as many subgenres of nonfiction as possible so that anyone and everyone can find something for them. As I was saying before, if you choose to take on these challenges, you can feel free to apply them to your book choices however you choose. Creativity is really encouraged. There is not one specific way that I think these challenges should be interpreted, but in case you're looking for some suggestions about how any of these challenges could be interpreted, or if you're looking for some recommendations about what to put on your own Nonfiction November TBR, I thought in this video I would go challenge by challenge, tell you all the different ways that I can personally think of that these challenges can be interpreted, tell you what I am going to be reading for each challenge, and give you a personal recommendation of a nonfiction book that I really like that I think would apply to each challenge. So let's start at the most obvious place, the beginning. Challenge number 1, Pastime or Pastime. I would like to start off by saying something that applies to all of the challenges, in that any of the words that are incorporated in any of our 4 challenges, if a title or a subtitle of a book contains one of those words, I think that's a way to apply one of these challenges. And then specifically for Pastime or Pastime, I think this is the most straightforward challenge of the bunch. On face value, it could obviously be a history book or a book about a hobby. I think Pastime could also mean a book that you bought a really long time ago that you've been meaning to read. Pastime could be a hobby of yours or a hobby you're looking to get into. Of course, you can combine the 2 words of this challenge or mix them between challenges. Again, whatever works for you. But if you combined the 2 words in this challenge, you could do the history of a specific hobby. I am choosing to focus on the pastime angle of this challenge. I'm picking a history book called Last Call, The Rise and Fall of Prohibition by Daniel Okrent. This book is the history of the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution that made alcohol illegal between 1920 and 1933. It was a massive failure of a social experiment, and after reading one of my favorite nonfiction books, The Poisoner's Handbook by Deborah Bloom, a few years back, I realized I know very little about prohibition, so I will be attempting to rectify that by reading this book. My recommendation for this challenge is a book that I absolutely loved. That is called Moonwalking with Einstein, The Art and Science of Remembering Everything by Joshua Foer. This is a fantastic piece of nonfiction in which journalist Joshua Foer becomes fascinated with people who are fascinated with memory. In this book, Foer begins to learn the techniques of so-called memory champions, so people who use specific methods to memorize vast amounts of information. He begins working toward competing in a memory championship himself, and along the way, we learn not only about his efforts to do so, but he gives us information about how the human memory works. I absolutely loved this book when I first read it, and I think it works for this challenge because this is a hobby of the memory champions, albeit a competitive one, and it's about remembering things that happened in the past. I'm annoying, I know. On to the next challenge, Self or Shelf. I know this one has a million different ways it could be interpreted, but the things that come to my mind are any books that say something about yourself, something about you personally. Shelf could mean a book that's been on your shelf for a really long time, or it could be a new edition. It could be a book about books. Self could also mean a psychology or sociology book that deals with a sense of self. Shelf could be a really pretty nonfiction book that you like to show off on your shelves. My TBR pick for this challenge focuses on the word self and I am planning to read She Has Her Mother's Laugh, The Power, Potential, and Perversions of Heredity by Carl Zimmer. I am fascinated by genealogy and ancestry, especially because I know so little about my own, so I'm hoping that this will be a fun romp into the subject matter, but also potentially teach me a little bit about how our ancestry comes to help us form our sense of self. But my recommendation for this challenge actually focuses on the other word, shelf. So I recommend to you The Professor and the Madman, A Tale of Murder, Insanity, and the Making of the Oxford English Dictionary by Simon Winchester. It is highly likely that most libraries, if not you yourself, have a modern version of the Oxford English Dictionary on your shelf. But what you may not know about the original version is that it had a huge number of contributions from a man who was locked up in an asylum for the criminally insane. In fact, the man in charge of this project didn't even know this information until well into the process. Overall, I found this to be a really surprising and really gripping story. It's one of those books that makes you forget you're reading nonfiction. I also could see this book applying to the Pastime challenge in case you want some mixing and matching action going on. But now on to challenge number 3, Wander or Wonder. I think Wander is a great one for any nonfiction book that includes travel. It could be a memoir in which the person is traveling. It could be a book about travel. And then I personally think that the word wonder is the most fun out of all 8 words that we've presented to you this year. I think wonder could be any book about something you've been interested in, that you want to learn more about, that you've been wondering about. It could also be about a subject matter that inspires wonder. My TBR selection for this challenge takes a little bit from each word. So I will be reading From Here to Eternity by Caitlin Doughty. This is mortician Caitlin Doughty's follow-up to her very successful memoir, Smoke It's in Your Eyes, which has been one of my favorite nonfiction books of the year so far. In this book, she travels the world searching out a concept that she champions in her earlier memoir, something she calls the good death. Death is a subject matter that we either gloss over or push to the back of our minds in the Western world, completely ignoring the fact that it comes for all of us eventually. But it's not that way in every culture. And it's my understanding about this book that Caitlin Doughty, during her travels, both participates in and observes funeral and death rituals in other cultures. And I'm sure she will go on to comment about what we can learn about both life and death from these other cultures who aren't afraid to look death directly in the face. And for this challenge, allow me to recommend The Age of Wonder, How the Romantic Generation Discovered the Beauty and Terror of Science by Richard Holmes. I actually took a course in college that centered almost completely around the concepts covered in this book, which discusses the Romantic Generation and 17th century scientific breakthroughs. So much about the world was being discovered by science before it was even called science. And oftentimes these discoveries came in direct conflict with the social and moral beliefs of the time. So it was a really interesting era filled with both discovery, but also conflict. Years after finishing this book, I am still thinking about its discussion of astronomer William Herschel. So this is a very good, very sticky piece of nonfiction. And for our last challenge, macro or micro, you can take these words as they are or use them as prefixes. Macro could apply to a nonfiction book that takes on a large scale or global issue, where micro could be a book about a more local concern. You could even read a book about Excel macros if you choose. I don't know your life. The book I'm going to be reading for this challenge actually combines both words. That book is Barrel Aged Stout and Selling Out: Goose Island, Anheuser-Busch, and How Craft Beer Became Big Business by Josh Knoll. This book focuses on the acquisition of Goose Island, a craft brewery out of Chicago, by Anheuser-Busch, the so-called King of Beer, in 2011. Goose Island was immediately accused of selling out, particularly by the craft beer community, who place value in the independence and innovation of small breweries. It seems that this book frames a larger argument around this particular incident, discussing the interactions between macro breweries and micro breweries, as the latter has gained a lot of market share in recent years. I am a big craft beer fan myself, so I think this one is going to be tremendously interesting. And my recommendation for this one leans toward the micro side of the challenge. That is, I Contain Multitudes, The Microbes Within Us in a Grander View of Life by Ed Yong. This was one of my nonfiction November selections from last year that ended up being one of my favorite nonfiction books of the entire year. This book is all about microbes, or microorganisms, that live in, on, or around every living thing on Earth. Most of the time when you think about microorganisms, you're thinking about bacteria, but in fact, most of the microbes that live on, in, or around your body are helpful or even essential to the functioning of your body. This book is not only well written, but it has an enormously cool subject matter that made me really hardcore geek out when I was reading it. I embarrassed myself a little bit, but I cannot recommend this enough if you like books about science. So those are all of the books on my TBR for this year's Nonfiction November, as well as some recommendations for each of our 4 challenges. I would love to hear from you in the comment section below if any of these sound interesting. Have you read them? Do you want to read them? I would also love to hear what is on your Nonfiction November TBR. If you're a fellow booktuber and you've made your own video, you can feel free to put the link to your video down in my comment section. It will originally be marked as spam, but I will unflag that. Or if you're posting your TBR anywhere else, I would really appreciate a link to that as well. I love looking at people's TBRs. You can choose to straight up tell me your TBR down in my comment section below, or you can hop on over to Goodreads. There is a new thread up in which we can discuss all of our TBR selections. Speaking of Goodreads, if you're not yet a member of our group, please come and join us. We're going to be having some discussions on there during the month of November. And be sure to follow our new Twitter account at NonficNovember. Link is also down below. Every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will be having a discussion about each of these challenges. If you would like to learn more about Nonfiction November, I will of course post the link to my announcements. I also was lucky enough to be interviewed by the new Bookshelf magazine all about Nonfiction November, its purpose, and why it began in the first place. I will put a link to that interview down below as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and please join me in counting down the days until November begins. Bye.